Incredibly privileged to have Jason Forbes, who is the Chief Digital and Media Officer for COTY, giving a keynote on brand irrelevance, why men of a certain age are often to blame. So come on up, Jason. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jason Forbes. I am Chief Executive of a digital agency called Beamly. How many people in the room here are male and over 50? I see a show of hands of two. We're going to come back to you guys in just a few seconds. Because really this topic today is around what we call brand irrelevance. COTY represents around 70 different brands. These are just a few of them. And I'm here actually today in my Beamly capacity as we represent a number of other brands to talk about brand irrelevance. And what I mean by that is consumer behavior changes. So the behaviors of my mum and the biases of my mum were very different to my little nephew. This on the left-hand side is my mum. She used to watch NBC on one TV channel for 3 hours, and as a brand, it was very easy to connect and communicate with her. On the right-hand side is my little nephew. And my little nephew is outside right there, and he is immersed in AR and has no clue that he's actually outside. And the right-hand side poses an enormous challenge for brands in the marketplace today. And the challenge is many of the decision makers at those brands are from a different era. And they often don't understand their personal biases when they make decisions around creative, around media, which is actually threatening the very relevance and existence of those brands today. So if we take my nephew on the right-hand side here and look at media, this is actually a kind of a slide from Facebook, which I love, which just describes what they call the squeeze, which is basically people like millennials and below, like my nephew, are saturated with media. So it's about kind of 12 hours a day, which means at any kind of point in time, media and the brands that actually activate media are competing, fighting for relevance against innumerable other brands who have the same mission in mind. But the challenge for older school brands is candidly that they're wired differently, that the decision makers of those brands often don't understand how brands need to compete in a world where it isn't a one-way exchange. It's a constant iteration between brand and consumer as brands evolve near real time. And that's a very different way of understanding how your brand should exist in the marketplace. Left-hand side is all media. So online now represents more than 50% of global media spend. And on the right-hand side, the biggest driver of online media spend is social. Social now more than 2 hours a day. And the concerning piece for many brands is the little kind of like circle in the middle there, where ads, TV ads, are now watched about at 1/5 of the time, meaning 80% of TV ads are not actually being watched by the viewers who are supposed to be watching them. And the numbers are also challenged as well across digital platforms as well. And so the key takeaway is if you are a brand and you are activating media, you should not assume that your brand is being viewed in the way or the manner you intended, right? It's often going to be happening at a time when that consumer is doing 3 other things at once. What it speaks to, therefore, is rewiring brands to better understand how they can become relevant in this era of media saturation. So left-hand side is how millennials are mostly spending their time. The middle kind of piece here really kind of calls out one of the inherent biases. So millennials, more than 50–60% of the time being spent with digital media. Men and women over 50, about 18% of the time. If you're watching TV shows and watching TV ads, if you're not on Snapchat and Instagram, Twitter, Facebook every single day, understanding how brands thrive and die, you as a decision maker at a brand are not in the right position to make decisions for your brand because you don't know how consumers are engaging with your brand. It's as simple as that. And so this left-hand side, word clouds are a really good example to call out some of these biases. On the left-hand side is how millennials view themselves. They're tech savvy, they're hippies, they're cool, etc. Some of those characteristics are reflected by other segments, but actually older segments regard millennials as being kind of like selfish, lazy, right? Not so. So some of these kind of entitled. And so these biases are really important because if you as an individual, whether you're working for a brand or not, don't recognize your own personal biases, that you belong to a segment. You have a set of behaviors and a set of characteristics that make you unique. Often the consumers you're going after have a different set of needs or behaviors or characteristics that make them unique. You need to understand what your consumers are looking for, and if you're not doing that, and if you have biases that relate to a different era, you will be challenged in terms of your brand relevance. So I liken this to some analogies. It'd be kind of controversial if you hired someone in finance that wasn't very good at numbers. It would also be kind of unusual to bring someone on in IT who hated computers. And similarly with teaching, it's rare to find a teacher that hates kids. But the irony, therefore, is we actually hire people in marketing that don't understand millennials, when millennials are the very segment that they're going after. It's like you should be fired. Like there's a fundamental gap here where if you don't understand the consumers you're going after, then why are you in marketing? And actually, the guy from VW spoke about this earlier today. It's not about manufacturing anymore or selling cars. It's about understanding consumers and the experiences that they yearn for. So a few other examples here. This is kind of looking at social media and number of accounts. How many people in the room have 8 social media accounts? You'd actually be surprised. You probably have more than you think. If you run through some of the logos there, like Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, etc., many people have more than they think. But the scary thing is the rest of the world is now pacing the US with more than 8 social accounts. And why that matters is if you're not spending the time where the rest of the world or where millennials or the segment you're going after are spending their time, how can you understand the right decisions that you need to make from a marketing perspective, whether that's creative, whether that's media activation, or other important decisions that will shape how your message is represented in the marketplace. So this is one I liked to do. This is basically, again, those platforms again. What I did was I divided the number of members by the number of engagers. Engagers are on the right-hand side in pink, basically people who contribute to that platform. They add commentary, upload videos, they post. And you see the percentages there. And what's interesting is that for platforms like Facebook Messenger and Snapchat, nearly 2/3 to 3/4 of the members are actually contributing content. And why that matters is, for most brands, they're used to a universe where their brands are on a TV show. It's a 30-second spot where there was no interaction. And in a very short space of time, over the past 8 years, that model has been turned on its head. So the most successful brands now are understanding that thousands, hundreds of thousands of consumers are engaging with their brand on a day-to-day basis. So we've all heard of celebrities. So if we think back to 5, 10 years ago, large celebrities would be associated with the brand. And candidly, that was a risk. If you were back in the 80s, if you wanted to have John McEnroe, for example, as your celebrity, that came with a trade-off. And even today, there's lots of examples of celebrity bad behavior, like a Tiger Woods, where the brand needs to revisit whether they want that celebrity to be their brand advocate. The model's so much more confusing now because you now, instead of just celebrities at the top of what we call an influencer pyramid, you have mega influencers, micro influencers. You have fans as brands, where literally hundreds of thousands of people are representing your brand in ways you could not possibly have dreamed of. And again, back to personal biases, if you as a decision maker are not comfortable with what that implies and the complexity that arises, you're going to find yourselves in very difficult positions. And many brands right now, as they look at platforms like Snapchat or like Facebook Messenger, are terrified. That's why they're not allocating media. They're allocating media to things they know and understand, like TV, print, maybe some video display advertising, but they're not engaging with the platforms where increasing numbers of millennials and younger, like my nephew, are spending their time. And it's all back to that personal bias. So the takeaway is becoming more comfortable, more confident on the platforms where your consumers spend your time. And if you do that, you'll actually find you'll be much more effective in terms of how your brand is represented. So this is what we call a brave new world. What it represents, I'm going to do a little bit of cosmetic bias here. So kind of top left, if anyone's going to go into a Boots or to a Target or to any kind of health and beauty shop in the last kind of like 10 years, a beauty assistant, 23 years old, at a college, would tell a 45-year-old woman the type of skin composition she has, what sort of facial structure she has, what sort of lipstick or mascara is the right fit for her. That 23-year-old has no clue about the needs of a 45-year-old. So the model that we're now seeing, and it isn't just in beauty, it's across CPG, where you as a consumer can go online, on YouTube or other, and actually find hundreds of thousands of influencers or other fans who are uploading content to describe their specific needs. And it's a brave new world because it means, as a brand, how your brand is being represented as each of these individual consumers are uploading a video to describe the look that they've got is terrifying. but if done well, can actually lead to thousands of influencers representing your brand across digital platforms where your consumers are spending your time. So getting it right, therefore, creates huge amounts of earned and owned media in ways you mightn't have thought of before. So I love this slide, which kind of basically describes what we call kind of hacking. And this idea ultimately of, this is called contouring. And basically contouring is literally kind of how a line is represented across your face. And contouring's evolved massively. This is actually kind of search volume of contouring, going from discovery to improvement, so different kind of users making it better, to the hack, which is ultimately where memes kind of arrived around kind of like clown-based contouring, etc., to where we are now, which is kind of different body parts being contoured. And this is actually a slide from YouTube, which I love, because it describes how effective brands become comfortable and understand what a trend is, how to key in on a trend, and actually to evolve a trend, as opposed to leaving a specific trend or a specific brand message and expecting it not to evolve over time. So relevant brands are evolving with the conversation. They're evolving with the dialogue. And that's where some of the digital platforms can be especially effective. So what I wanted to describe is a 4-pillar framework. And this is something that we are seeing more effective brands use, either kind of individually as one pillar or multiple pillars, to help decision makers who may not be from a certain era to overcome those personal biases, right? To overcome some of the challenges that they didn't grow up with augmented reality or virtual reality as part of their day-to-day. So it starts top left with what we call marketing science, which is basically just understanding your consumer in ways that were not possible 5-10 years ago. And I'll describe some examples of that in a second. Top right is what we call content foundry. This is all about creating the right content for the consumer and the needs you've identified around that consumer. Bottom right is media optimization, which is where programmatic sits. So once you've understood her need or his need, understand the creative or the message you want to create. What media are you activating? Are you activating TV and print when she spends 65% of her time on Snapchat, Instagram, and YouTube? It may sound obvious, but you should actually ask your brand decision makers how well aligned are where your target consumer is spending your time and where you're activating media. I kid you not, we've worked with brands where 98% of their media activation was TV and print, when 40% of their consumers' time was spent on digital. That's the type of thing that people should be fired for. So again, that mismatch of how you're activating media, where your consumer is, and the right creative on that media. So we heard from Teeds earlier around vertical videos. Again, these may sound like obvious things. You'd be shocked by how many brands are taking a 30-second TV spot and dropping it into a Facebook or an Instagram feed, and not understanding that audio doesn't work in that feed. So your voiceover is irrelevant. So these are obvious kind of takeaways, but connecting ultimately consumer insight with the right content on the right platform is what we're seeing great brands use to drive omnichannel and e-commerce sales. So to break each of those apart, the first in marketing science, social listening should be kind of second nature to everyone in the room. It's one of the most effective ways to overcome personal biases. You can actually key in on a given segment or a given kind of topic and understand how consumers in a given market, UK, Germany, China, the US, are speaking about a topic, about a VW, about Passat, about a scandal, about a makeup, about a lipstick, about a competitor. It's a really powerful way not just to understand what the conversation is, but the specific words that certain demographics are using. So if I said on fleek to you or non-touring, you may not know what those mean. I didn't know what those meant a couple of months ago either. But by keying in on social listening, you learn the words and the messaging and the emphases of different segments so that whatever you create, whatever content you create, will be more relevant to the consumers that you're going after. And we've actually done this with kind of our AOR Zenith, and so they've brought great capabilities to the table, as can other agencies, to better understand the types of consumers you want to go after. Another kind of effective model is using trends. So if there's an emerging trend, where is that trend coming from across different consumer segments, across different markets? How are they speaking about that trend? What's the search volume of that trend? What are the keywords you should be using if you want to key in on that trend? So trend reports can be a very powerful way to confront decision makers with biases, to go, this is our consumer, this is how she or he is speaking about our brand or our category. Why are we speaking this way? Why are we activating on these platforms where she isn't there anymore or he isn't there anymore? So trend reports, very powerful to start bringing kind of data to the discussion and making sure it's a data-driven decision that you're making. So another thing that we've seen great brands activate is rapid surveys. So this example here is with a retailer in the US called Target. In this case, the brand reached more than 5 million shoppers in 72 hours to show to Target how consumers or shoppers are speaking about their brand, and pointed out to Target a 16% growth opportunity if people in Target who aren't shopping beauty could be convinced to shop beauty at Target. And so again, using surveys is a very powerful way. And in the digital world, a survey doesn't take 6 weeks. It doesn't cost $100,000. You can activate surveys for $5,000, $10,000 in 72 hours to bring very large, powerful data sets to inform the decisions that you're making, both internally, but with retailers and other stakeholders as well. Another thing we do is personas. So we've begun constructing personas. We've seen more successful brands move away from traditional segments like millennials, for example, to really understand behavioral, contextual, or psychographic reasons for why one segment is different to another. There's a personal favorite here. Makeup besties are all about social. They love telling all their friends about the latest makeup trends, etc. Inward expressives couldn't give a crap about social. It's all about kind of how beauty makes them feel on the inside. So why does that matter? Well, why would you activate a piece of content saying 5 ways to get the look that your friends will envy you for if you're targeting inward expressives? That's not what will resonate with them. So understanding different personas and how different messages will resonate with those personas can be hugely powerful in discussions with your creative agency, internal or external, to make sure that the messaging is on point for the right persona. So bucket number 2 is what we've seen great brands activating, is what we call Content Foundry. And really what this is all around is content testing. And I was surprised by some of the sessions earlier today. No one mentioned content testing. Why would you invest $500,000 in a TV spot before testing whether that TV spot will resonate with the audience you're going after? This wasn't possible 10 years ago. It is possible now. So great brands that we're seeing are testing content before they risk literally millions of dollars in TV or print activation when they haven't tested with the audience that they're going after. So some simple examples here. And this really just talks to the fact across different platforms, you can use different types of content to test which platform will it actually resonate on. So a 30-second spot will be very different from a video perspective on Snapchat versus Twitter versus Instagram versus Facebook. So some kind of like simple best practices can make sure that the message you're activating is appropriate for the media platform that you're driving through. And some best practices, you saw some of these earlier from Teads, for example. Again, on the left-hand side there, I've taken a kind of a 30-second spot, or I've taken an image, a banner image, and just dropped it into Facebook, as opposed to taking advantage of the screen dimensions of a feed on the right-hand side to better kind of represent how my brand should be placed. And if you speak with the Facebook, YouTube, any of the major platform providers, they can provide this to you, but you'd be shocked by how few brands are actually taking this and taking advantage of it. So another example of content testing, this is actually 11 different articles that one of the brands we worked with at COTY activated. And what they actually found was, for each different article, different levels of resonance. So in this example here, 95% of respondents for that 4th article, which is the one lipstick that will help you create the perfect matte lip, actually 95% of people who read that article then responded to a survey on the right-hand side. So we've actually seen, from a media efficiency perspective, if you test different messages, different articles, different creative, with the same consumer, you get profoundly different levels of media performance, like literally between 3 to 6x. Meaning if you got $1 million in media to spend, you could actually instead spend $200,000 for the same level of reach, video views, clicks, or other. And this is an example of that. So back to our makeup BFFs, you remember from before? When we activated this campaign here towards people who are interested in beauty across social, we saw a 24 to 33% cost per click. When we activated that towards actual makeup BFFs, so these articles were geared towards them because it's all about trends and sharing with their friends, the CPC dropped down to about kind of 9 to 12p. So kind of a massive media efficiency saving, again, simply by doing some obvious things around content testing to make sure your message is relevant for the consumer that you're going after. So This other kind of example that I love is, again, just using social listening. So the example here on the left-hand side, keying in on specific trends. And this isn't beauty-centric. If you're any vertical can actually do social listening to understand how consumers think about insurance or healthcare or automotive. It's all available to us. And we use this to key in on different trends to create 10 different looks. And then we actually use that content testing to test which looks resonated the most with different audience segments. Again, this isn't that complicated to activate. You can turn this around 2, 4, 6 weeks if you ask your creative agency or media agency, internally or externally, to participate and collaborate with you to try and bring this type of capability to the table. And that's what great brands are beginning to do. So the third bucket is around kind of media. And I want to spend just a second on that because obviously this track is all around programmatic. And I guess the takeaway is thinking of programmatic by itself is a massively missed opportunity. It's not just about programmatic. We've heard that from all the panels earlier today. It's programmatic with content, with consumer to drive sales. So those 4 elements when working together really can deliver outstanding media performance. And we've begun to see that. So in my Beamly role, we've moved from just social activation to actually doing all the in-house programmatic, both open and private video and display for COTY across the major brands. And we've been able to connect that with more rapid content testing to drive this type of capability here. We're looking at different kind of media platforms, programmatic as well as social. We're looking at different personas, trying different concepts to test, and ultimately different creative types to determine which journey, if you will, is delivering the best level of efficiency, or if you connect to sales or awareness, the best level of effectiveness as well. And that's the kind of the nascent model that we think is very exciting. And we've seen it kind of borne out in the data. So this is kind of looking at IAB and other kind of benchmarks. And by connecting the right consumer insights with the right type of content development on the right platform, we've seen in programmatic, the numbers actually kind of outperform existing benchmarks. So some good results there. So the last kind of I guess bucket, if you will, is what we call omnichannel. And that really is understanding the user journey, particularly in digital. So once you've actually found the right consumer, you've determined the right content to actually message to her, you've activated media, well, what happens next? And so typically what we're now doing is actually using that media activation to drive consumers either in-store or online. So we call that omnichannel. And examples of that are actually helping brands to construct new websites. They can actually create web user journeys that didn't exist before. And I'll show you just one example of that here, which is we call some of these user journeys like fresh recruit, returning user, digital sidekick. Everyone's familiar with Alexa. So we're describing Balexa, like a beauty Alexa, right? Whereby consumers literally can say, it's Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Here are 3 new looks that we think would be great for you. If I want to activate one of those looks with voice activation, I can actually see what that look looks like on me, and I can buy that using voice activation sent directly to my home. So these are just early examples of how we're beginning to activate e-commerce. And the power of this is we can actually track user conversion across insights to content to media into sales in a way that we couldn't do even 18 months ago. So really the takeaway from this discussion today is where do your brands sit? And kind of where, if you think about it, would your brand decision makers be old school, which is really kind of thinking through activating a product or a service? It could be a shoe, it could be a lipstick, it could be a car, and just activating traditional media to drive product sales. Or are your brand decision makers bold school? What's bold school all about? It's listening to your consumer. It's using that consumer insight to activate different types of content to test different looks. It's actually engaging them on their platform of choice, and it's using it to drive an experience or a basket size. And we've seen kind of great brands move much more towards bold school. So the question is, where do your brands sit? Thank you very much.
Perfect. So before everyone leaves, do we have any questions in the house? Yes. Take it away, Katie.
Thank you. Super interesting hearing about the challenges you have to set to yourself to think about a new consumer. What do you find is the hardest thing when you have other men joining the team, and how do you sort of go through that process to check that people are going to be really interested in engaging with the right consumers for your brands?
We actually try and call out personal biases. We run sessions with brands where we ask them the questions, kind of, who do you describe your target consumer? And a lot of brands confuse target consumer with addressable consumer. Like the most obvious example is Harley Davidson. If people think of Harley Davidson consumer, it's profoundly different to the corporate guy in his 50s who buys the Harley bike, right? And that mismatch is often one big problem. So by running these sessions, we actually directly are beginning to address these personal biases, where people see, wow, I really don't understand who my target consumer is. And even if I do understand who she is or who he is, I really don't understand what their needs are. I don't understand where they spend time across different media platforms. And I absolutely have no clue how on a almost hourly basis they're putting themselves out there. Like, my wife is 35, and I see how comfortable she is on an hourly basis to post stuff I'd never post. Like, each time I post, I feel sick. Like, how many times will I be liked? Whereas it's a different way of thinking that she and people kind of younger than her are typically much more comfortable with engaging in media and platforms and brands than I am. And so I think we all have different biases, and so we found this session is very helpful to call out and at least personally be aware of the biases that one brings to the table.
Jason, actually, I have a question for you. You ran Beamly before, and I assume Beamly's running essentially all of the in-house buying that you guys are doing. How big is the team that you guys have to execute on all the brands for COTY?
So we're about 130 people at Beamly.
Okay.
But of those, about 70, so the majority are actually on the tech side.
Right.
So we mentioned before, we're building out for all the major COTY brands a series of 2.0 websites. So we're constructing those websites to drive, the kind of great load performance, mobile responsive, et cetera, et cetera. We're also constructing a data lake. So we heard earlier before the importance of data governance. Where does all your data sit? Right. So the tech side of the Beamly group, we've got like product leads and engineers kind of use kind of like dual track agile. So kind of every 2-week sprints are building a lot of functionality across COTY's stack. So most of the resources there, but on the activation side, that's where the remainder sits.
Got it. That's great. Any other questions before we break?
And I guess just on that is to call out the fact, it was interesting the kind of the panel debate there earlier. Like I think I agree with the point around kind of value, and I think certainly kind of Guy from Zenith and others are here. So Zenith is our AOR. We've actually constructed what's proven to be a pretty good model, right? And understanding kind of like what each person does well, right? And so ultimately, if we can create bread, maybe they can create like a much more exotic recipe. So what we're trying to do is move everyone up the curve. Okay, so now I can now create pasta, but there's more things in the recipe continuum, right? And so I think with brands and with agencies, if you're moving the needle up in sophistication, then everybody gets better. So I think that's what we've seen has worked well so far.
Sure, but I mean, I guess the interesting thing is that you and COTY is, with the exception of Reckitt and Kellogg's, are one of the few that have actually brought programmatic really in-house and executing both website design and build all the way through to full campaign execution programmatically and managing your own data as well. That's a lot to bite off on.
Early days so far.
Good. Any final questions? Yes.
I was surprised to hear at the end that websites are still important for these types of brands, considering that all the engagement's on social. What's the role of a website unless you're transacting on it?
Yeah, so first of all, it's that. So ultimately, kind of all the sites going live will have a direct-to-consumer e-commerce capability, right? At the end of the day, we don't at COTY see that as being a very large amount of the revenues. Ultimately, kind of our retailer customers are where the lion's share of the revenues will come from. But it does allow us to experiment much more quickly because you control the full stack. You can actually kind of bring insights to the table. So I was just at NACDS in the States, which is where all the biggest retailers are, and sharing with a retailer that we've seen a 3 times lift in sales conversion or a growth in basket size from $6 to $25. Those types of stats make our most important customers sit up and take notice, and building out our own e-commerce capability allows us to more rapidly innovate and bring those insights to the table.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason.
Great. Thank you.